excited to be joined by Professor Tim Spector, who works with us at Zoe, who has been leading not only some COVID research, but who's also led the PREDICT study research that we've led at Zoe, who's also joined by Emily Leeming, who is a registered dietitian. I'll let you guys quickly introduce yourselves before we get going.
So, yeah, I'm Tim Spector. I work at King's College London, just opposite the House of Parliament, and one of the scientific co-founders of Zoe and lead investigator of the PREDICT intervention trial, and also happened to run the COVID symptom study app program with over 4 million people on that as well. So I'm keeping busy at the moment.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a dietitian who I consult for Zoe, but I also am doing a PhD at the same department that Tim's from at King's College London. I'm investigating the gut microbiome and the impact of diet on our gut microbes.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for joining us today. So I guess as we've all been in lockdown, we've been thinking about what we're eating out less, we're cooking at home more. But I guess we've all looked at the media and seen, headlines about whether or not people have gained weight, people not fitting into their jeans. And so today we're going to talk about some of the data that we actually have behind whether or not people have gained weight during lockdown, and what are those habits that have changed to shape our waistlines at the moment. And then we're going to get into some of the science behind snacking, what it actually does to our body, which is super, super interesting. So Tim and Emily are going to talk about that a bit. Emily is going to take us through some tips for smarter snacking. So this is advice that is a bit more scientific, not necessarily the stuff that you'll find on Instagram as you're scrolling through. So again, everything based in science with some amazing research that Tim and Emily have led that is behind it. And then finally, we'll go through some Q&A with questions from you guys. So throughout the session, I'm joined by Kirsten as well, who's on the team here at Zoe, and she's also a nutritionist. So she'll be posing some questions to Emily and Tim throughout the session. So please feel free to just add them via YouTube. So everyone's been talking about the COVID-19. So much like the freshman 15, in the months that we've been locked down, how have our eating habits changed? And Tim, we've talked to journalists quite a lot about this here in the UK and in the US. So what have we started to see between the link of those who have had COVID and hospitalization and some of the comorbidities around that?
Well, obviously there's a big link to health, to gut health really is the common link, because we know the main risk factors, apart from age and frailty, seem to be being overweight, having diabetes, having some metabolic condition, and also it's more severe in areas of deprivation where they're likely to be worse diet habits. So all of this points towards the gut having a fairly central role in our response to COVID. That's really what we're seeing, and so that really prompted us to these associations prompted us to actually look and see what was going on both in the US and the UK with these large-scale surveys to see what has actually happened. Not just at the beginning of this pandemic, but in the months that people have been behaving very differently, and is this going to have a knock-on effect on general health, but also possibly for the risk of people getting infected in second waves, etc. And that's why we did this massive survey in both countries to look at it, and we're going to report on the US one now.
Perfect. So, Tim, why don't you talk to us about snacking? Like, what's a typical day of snacking look like for an average person?
Well, Mr. and Mrs. Average will snack in general closer to 3 times a day. So we've gone from our ancestors having 1 or 2 meals a day to us basically having about 6 meal episodes a day. And this is a fairly modern invention. And this now accounts for about 1/4 of our total energy intakes. And so it's a really important thing to recognize that, you know, most of these may not be very healthy. And it's a huge billion-dollar industry that is pushing us to have more and more of them all the time. And they're getting accessible, they're often getting cheaper, and they're made to look healthier than ever before. But of course, you know, what is the real cost on this to our health, particularly when we're seeing bright labels telling us these are low cal, this is low fat, this is high protein, all these enticing little messages to make us do what we probably shouldn't be doing.
Exactly. And I think, you know, one of the things that we hear you talk about and that we've done with Predict is that most nutrition labels and most nutrition advice is sort of geared towards an average person. But realistically, how many people are actually average?
Well, virtually none. So our Predict study showed that when you gave everyone identical foods, this is over 1,000 people identical foods, and looked how their bodies responded to those foods, no two individuals responded the same way. So the idea that just because a food label says it's low in fat and everyone should have low fat food is nonsense, because some people deal with fat much better than they deal with carbs, and this is true across the board. So I think we're moving away from this dependent on the big food companies telling us what to eat, to actually working it out for ourselves.
Exactly. And I think one of the exciting things that we're trying to do at Zoe is, instead of starting by looking at calories or nutrition labels, is we're starting to try and change people's starting point when they look at food. Instead of looking at labels, starting with their biology to understand, you know, am I a good fat metabolizer or a good carb metabolizer? And I think we're now getting to the point where we're about to launch something that can show anybody at home what that looks like for them, which is really exciting.
Yeah, so it's a whole new area, really, this personalized nutrition that's going to be absolutely huge, I think, as it takes off. As you know, we've got the early science coming out now, but I think it's not going to stop there. And I think it's every big company is now worried about this and has their own teams trying to work out how they deal with this problem. The fact that they can't sell the same low calorie, high protein bar to everybody now. They're going to have to be looking in the future to do this in a much more sensible way based on science.
Definitely. So Tim, why don't we talk about what we learned from the survey? So of the 97,000 people who responded to this food survey that we did in the United States, what were some of the headlines?
Well, nearly a third of people reported that they actually snacked more than they would normally do. And in those people, which is, you know, a third of the population, they put on 7 pounds of weight on average, with some people putting on a lot more than that and some less. But that's the average, which is a lot of weight for any population to sustain. And as everyone knows, it's a lot harder to take weight off than it is to gain it. Another way people put on weight was drinking the booze, and about 1 in 5 people increased their alcohol consumption. I know that was one of the side effects for me. And in those people, nearly 5 pounds was the average amount those people put on. So just to put these into context, this is 5 times more weight than the average American would put on during the holiday season. And I think that puts it into perspective, that this is a real, as if it wasn't bad enough, we've got this extra whole weight health problem to deal with.
Definitely. So, you know, one of the things that we were talking about when we were looking at the data is, you know, the majority of people tend to, you know, as we talk about with friends and family, gain weight over Christmas, Thanksgiving, go into January thinking, new year, new me, I'm going to go into a new diet plan, a new way of thinking. And so what we wanted to do was look at the average weight gained from that period, and then sort of an average autumn. And then we've compared that to drinkers in lockdown and snackers in lockdown, which shows some really interesting insights here.
Yeah, I mean, the graph tells it all, really. Just shows you the differences We all, like most animals, tend to lay down a bit of fat over the winter time and tend to lose it again in the summer when we're more active. But this just shows that seasonal thing is really put into in perspective by both the drinkers and the snackers in the average in this American survey. So yeah, these are worrying figures. Of course, there were some people that went the other way, but this is where the problems are, and this is affecting about 1 in 3 people.
Exactly. And I guess, Emily, when you're speaking to clients who are trying to manage their diet and their overall health, do you see a relationship between drinking and snacking?
It depends. It's so different for each person. I think a lot of it goes back to, why are we reaching for that snack? Why are we reaching for a drink? Is there an emotional attachment behind that? Are we looking for something that's comforting? Or are we going for a snack because that's something that's going to give us an energy boost, perhaps halfway through the afternoon? So it really tends to change day by day for different people. Having said that, there's not that much literature around snacking and drinking. It's still quite kind of early days with us knowing that much about what's going on and what the relationship is between the two.
For sure. So just breaking this down on a state by state level, we saw, the top 10 states for snacking being quite a mix of some southern and New England states in here. And then I think we will also publish some of the states that snacked the least as well on the blog afterwards. So, yeah. Tim and Emily, why does this incredible weight gain from things like snacking and drinking, why does this matter?
Well, I mean, there's 2 things. One's the actual weight, which has its own effects on the body, and we know that just having that extra adipose tissue has effects on the metabolism, has effects on inflammation. But as you said, the underlying reason that people put on the weight, what were they eating? If that was generally poor quality food, highly processed snacks, that has its extra effect, if you like, on the body. And we believe a lot of this is due to its negative effect on your gut microbes. So studies have shown that anything that has lots of emulsifiers in it, lots of chemical ingredients, lots of artificial sweeteners, will have a negative effect on your gut microbes and alter their metabolism, alter the immune boosting effects that they have as well. So in a way, it's a double whammy. It's the weight itself, but also the foods you're eating, the fact you're not resting your gut. All these things will have a negative impact on the gut microbiome. And we're thinking that the gut microbiome is the center really of where it all happens, because if that's healthy, you've got a healthy immune system, you're better at fighting infection, you're better at keeping your weight under control, you're better at control as well. And so any negative effects that have, it's really bad news. We need to bring that to side. And we know that, but if going back to the weight, just the weight itself, we know from other studies that just the sort of weight gain that we saw in lockdown, if nothing else happened, that increased your risk of diabetes by over a quarter, cardiovascular disease by 12%, and about cancer by 20%. So these little effects do matter if people aren't able to get that weight off, which unfortunately generally they can't. So we need to be looking at what this means and what this means for prevention. And we know that heavy drinking's generally been linked with with metabolic health in a bad way. 1 glass of wine may be okay, but not a bottle. No one's shown that any amount of beer is particularly good for you. So all these things do matter. That's the key here. And I guess the reason they matter, the science behind this is changing quite rapidly. And before, we didn't really understand what it was about certain foods that were causing the problem. But thanks to our PREDICT study and the details we're gathering from these very large scale intervention studies that have been done on this size before, we see that we can have something with carbohydrates in it, and you get your glucose and your insulin. We're now showing that basically you get increased hunger, and this also higher peak. It also means that your appetite increases, so you tend to eat your next meal earlier, and you can actually have high calorie intake. So really important to understand now to try and control these surges in glucose, and also reduce these dips, which not everyone gets, but certain people are very prone to these glucose dips, which make them lethargic, and also likely to impact how much they eat their next meal. So this is a really exciting science that only by looking at thousands of people can get to grips with.
Tim, your mic seems to be cutting out. Is there a way to just double check? We just had some reports.
Not much I can do about it at the moment, but
that's much better. We can hear you now.
Emily can talk over me if she wants.
Do you want me to take over?
Yes, please.
Okay. So looking at fats, what we saw in the PREDICT study is, again, similar to what Tim was we got maybe through the bandwidth there. We all have a very individualized response to our blood lipids. So after we eat something, it comes into our digestive system, absorbed into our bloodstream, and different people are shown to clear their blood lipid levels at different rates. So what we look at in terms of low-grade inflammation is for people who probably have like a worse clearance of those blood lipids. So once they get absorbed into the body, they're used as energy and for different things within the body. But it's whether we get this kind of chronic low-level inflammation is when we get these lipids kind of acting in a long-term negative way. When we say chronic, chronic means that it's long-term, low-grade, and it's happening over a consistent period of time. So dietary inflammation is one of those quite complex, almost catch-all terms. It's very multifactorial, so there's many different ways to measure dietary inflammation. So we can look at, for example, inflammatory markers, but we also look at responses in terms of glucose, so blood sugar responses, or blood fat responses. And this is just trying to capture possibly some of the unhealthy effects that can be caused by what we eat in our diet.
So there was a question that that came in the past few minutes with someone asking, why is it so easy to gain weight, but why is it so difficult to lose it? And how does our biology impact that?
It's so complex. We're still learning so much about the story around weight. I think we have quite a black and white narrative from the media that is associated with a lack of willpower if we can't lose weight, that it's really easy, and it's really not. It's actually incredibly difficult. We've got not that much research about the long term. In the long term, that maybe 80% of people find it difficult to lose over 10% of their body weight. So that's really, really difficult. The reasoning behind that, we still don't really know that much yet. We think there's some element of your gut microbiome, your genes, your diet. There's so many different bits and pieces that we're still trying to piece together on why that might be.
Evolution has a role in it as well. So that's the other point. So that, we were meant to have a bit of fat to survive, whereas actually it wasn't really a problem the other way around for our ancestors. So our genes have generally evolved that it's much harder to lose the weight than to gain it quickly, because that aids survival. So that's what we have to also overcome.
It was a very much protective, as Tim says, evolutionary way for moving forward. So those who put on weight easier probably would have survived, you know, much longer back in the day. But now we have, you know, access to food and it, you know, changing times. So there's lots around that.
Cool. So I guess, you know, building on that a bit more, talk us through what happens over the course of a day as we eat, and why that dietary inflammation matters throughout the course of the day.
Tim, is your microphone working? Do you want to take
I'll start and you can cut me off if it isn't. So yeah, so immediately after you eat, you do see some changes in your body, and your blood sugar and your blood fat goes up, and this in a way causes some stress to the body, which is quite normal. Inflammation is something that is there to help protect you, and it's generally a natural response to invaders or infections or anything else, just to get your system back in shape again. But really we're talking about when it goes slightly wrong, and so a few hours after you've eaten, things should be back to normal. But if, for example, your lipids, your blood fats are still raised, we've shown that you're still getting inflammation there hours after it should have gone, and so we're not eliminating it as we'd hoped. And if you're repeating this every day, you're getting these levels of inflammation that build up, and you start getting what's called chronic inflammation, which has knock-on effects on every cell in your body. You're like a period of consistent stress, or your blood vessels are just acting slightly differently than they would be, as if you're being just slightly attacked every day by some unknown virus. And after years, this starts putting you at risk of heart disease and diabetes. So we now believe that this dietary inflammation is really important to minimize as much as possible. You can't eliminate it, but just having a little bit is fine. It's like a little bit of stress is good, too much is really bad. And that's what we're trying to do here by introducing, getting the right foods to keep that in the right balance.
And before we go into some tips from Emily for smarter snacking, like how different are people's responses to, you know, to sugar and to carbohydrates and fats, Tim? Like how big is that difference?
They're massive. I mean, it was the most amazing thing when we first saw the graphs from the study. We saw 8 to 10-fold differences between people in this, and you know, even identical twins had different results. So there was a real, it was an aha moment to say that, you know, the scale of these changes weren't just, it wasn't just random error. People really were different, even eating exactly the same amounts of fat and the same amount of carbs. So everyone out there is going to have a very different profile to me or their neighbors or anyone else. So meaning that you can't just take someone's example and say, I'm going to do exactly the same.
Yeah. So someone who's tuned in has just said, you know, what should I eat to reduce dietary inflammation? So practically, what steps could somebody take to understand, you know, the foods that are not right for them?
Well, basically, it's understanding more what's going on about the foods and how they react, and working out whether you're someone who responds to, you can deal with fats well, or you deal with sugars well, and you start tailoring your diet to that. Obviously, everyone should be eating healthier anyway, but essentially the less peaks in fat and the less peaks in sugar you have, the better. And that's exactly what we're doing with the Zoe team, to be able to give you a test that you can sort out yourself very rapidly in a few weeks, to work out what type of foods can be balanced to you, giving them a score that's detailed for you, and then allowing you to optimize the foods without really changing the amount of calories or satisfaction or reducing your range at all. So it's just making sensible choices based on your biology.
Exactly. And I think, you know, if you've signed up for the webinar today and you're tuning in, you might already be on the wait list for the test kits that we are launching in August, but it's essentially a much shorter version of our study that we've been doing for the past couple of years through Predict. I think most of us on this call have actually done the study ourselves, so we've been able to find out the right foods for our biology. But I think there are some also ahead of that test kit launching for you to be able to test your biology on your own. Emily, what are some of the ways you can understand how a food impacts you? Is it whether or not you're hungry, or what things can people look out for?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to do with tuning in to your own body and how you feel. So listening to your hunger and satiety signals. Are you feeling energized afterwards? Are you feeling satisfied from what you eat? A lot of this has to do with taste preferences, how you feel in the moment, how your energy levels are that day, how much exercise you've done. So it can change day to day. And I think our bodies are actually incredibly clever in the terms of something we might eat a bit more one day and eat a bit less the next day, but that's just our bodies kind of calibrating themselves over the week. And I think a lot of the time, this busy day to day, we slightly kind of forget about our bodies, and we kind of just busy, eating in front of a computer, go, and we're really forgetting actually that if we're just like listening to what we need and how we feel, together with obviously understanding about maybe how foods go together, like how can we bring in some clever snacks that will maybe make you feel more energized and satisfied to keep you going through the day. So that's something. We've got some snack ideas in terms of things that you can do, and snacks are it's a really easy, effective way to make a big impact on your diet quality. It's something that you're not having that communal setting like you do with lunch where you're factoring in other people. It's really something that if you can be prepared and have a few things up your sleeve that are good in terms of what you like, and also something that's going to give you energy. So what we really look for as an overall in terms of snacks are things that have a carbohydrate in them in order to give you that boost of energy, and then also combining that with something that's got fat and protein in it. This is going to just keep you feeling fuller for longer. It's going to help even out the glucose coming out, and knowing that you can then feel more energized going out through the day. So things like that could be carrots and hummus, fruits and Greek yogurt. There's some amazing evidence that's recently come out around almonds and how that has a really beneficial effect on reducing your cardiovascular risk. So having something like carrying around a Ziploc bag of nuts in your bag can be a really good way of just having something that you can go to when you're like, okay, I'm feeling quite hungry now. This is something that I can...
And just to add to that, the whole point is also diversity. So not having the same snack every day for months on end, as some people do. We know how important diversity is for your gut microbes, and a diversity of seeds and nuts is one of the easiest ways to get increased numbers of plants into your diet every week. So, and you can have those really on any, add them to any food as well. So variety is really important in this general approach.
Yeah. And also in terms of adding to things tasting more delicious, getting that satisfaction factor out of it, it means if you're feeling satisfied from a meal, you're more likely to be able to keep going and not be kind of mindlessly grabbing for anything, and kind of really appreciating what you're having in the moment, taking that time to step back and enjoy it.
Yeah. So there's a question that's just come in around late night snacking. And I know that when we were prepping for this talk today, we had a conversation about late night snacking. So one of our viewers has said, I can't seem to stop late night snacking. Is this bad for my health? So let's hear both of your opinions on this. Let's start with Emily.
So there's evidence to show that snacking later at night can have a negative impact on your metabolic health. This in comparison to snacking during the day is generally seen as being okay. But I think what's interesting, and maybe the question you want to be asking yourself is, why am I reaching for something? Is it an emotional need that I'm looking to kind of fulfill, something that's comfortable? Obviously, I think we talk about having something sweet in the context of a meal. It's slightly different. We're talking about having that in a combination of different foods, and your body will respond to that slightly differently. But if you're finding that you're then snacking late at night, It may mean that maybe you didn't have enough to eat earlier in the day, maybe it wasn't satisfying. When I talk about satisfaction, you know, I think quite often when we talk about salads, we think about it's a, you know, piece of lettuce and a tomato. But when I'm talking about satisfaction, I mean making that salad into something that's really, you know, satisfying. So having some protein in there from chicken and feta, you know, all those delicious seeds, you know, getting some boiled potato for some carbohydrates. So really making sure that you're having a very nourishing, filling meals during the day as well as those snacks.
And Tim, what's your view on?
I'm a bit anti-snacker. So basically, you know, study Mediterranean diets a lot. And when you go to Greece and Spain and Italy, and these people that live a long time and have less cancer and heart disease, etc., and less obesity, they essentially have less meals. They're less meal episodes. They're not hunting around, you know, for the donuts at 11 o'clock, and they don't have big meetings with piles of goodies with their coffee. So I think there's a cultural idea to this, and this to me means that they eat properly at the meals, so that they get used to being slightly hungry between their meals. And there's increasing evidence that particularly at night, the longer you can leave it overnight to fast, the healthier your microbes are. And if they're healthier, the better your immune system, lower your inflammation, etc. So I think we need to look at other cultures as well, outside the US and British cultures, and realize that, yes, some people feel the need to snack and they enjoy it, that's fine, but I don't think we have to assume that it's the right thing to do. And it might be looking at our meals, as Emily said, in other ways. But if you can leave 12 hours overnight with no food, there's increasing evidence that's really good. And you can eat the same calories over the day and still actually lose weight. So I think that's a real increasing, exciting bit of science.
Yeah, there was some great research that was also published in March of this year showing the connection between the Mediterranean diet in older folks in reducing frailty and improving their immunity and things like that. So, you know, as we're thinking about eating during the time that we're in, you know, adding more vegetables and thinking about rituals during meals is really important too. Do you guys ever think about how long it takes to eat a meal and, you know, some of the other ways that people can slow down as they're eating as well? So
there's you know, looking at things in the mindful eating. I mean, obviously this isn't convenient all the time. I don't think anyone can be, there's no such thing as a perfect mindful eater. I think it's just taking the moment to be present when we can. And I think especially if, you know, busy working or maybe got children running around in the background, it's just saying, I'm going to take this time for myself. I'm going to concentrate and be present with what I'm eating. And a lot of that helps your body to register. If you're looking at food, for example, even just the smell and looking at food helps that cephalic phase where your brain already starts registering the smell, and you get the juices flowing in your mouth for something saying that's delicious. This is all part of a digestive process already starting. So it's really important to try and incorporate that, but also from a kind of sensory pleasure point of view. You know, we're enjoying and tasting our food, we're tasting the texture, and really the more in tune that we are with that, it really helps us to kind of become more aware of, okay, that's how I'm feeling full, I feel satisfied, okay, I've got energy, I'm going to move on with my day.
It takes about 20 minutes generally for the gut to send the signals back to the brain that it's feeling full. And so people who eat fast generally are not going to get the same signals as people who eat slowly. So I think that's another reason that, and again, Mediterranean lifestyle, they do tend to very slow, boring meals. And that's one reason that maybe they don't overeat as much as people, you know, eating meals in their car or other things where also you get distracted and your brain can't do its normal job and work out when you're full.
Yeah. So someone's written in, you know, surely with weight loss, it's calories in and calories out. Tim, I think, you know, you've got quite a strong view on this. And I think it's very much part of our ethos at Zoe that this isn't the way to necessarily lose weight.
Yeah, I mean, the calorie is the most overhyped device for weight loss I think there's ever been. And, you know, calories were invented over 100 years ago. And most of our advice we get is based on this premise that you can measure exactly what comes in and what goes out. And if you get that balance right, you'll lose weight. And basically, that's never been shown to be true long term. You could do starvation diets and they work, but anything more subtle fails miserably. And also, we know various things now that we didn't know then. One, that there's no standard amount. So the idea that 2,000 calories is the right amount for women, again, is a fallacy based on this whole idea of an average. There's a huge range of what people's metabolism is. The other is that if you restrict calories in one end, so you go on a calorie restriction diet, you're going to end up having a slower metabolism out. So your body will burn it less. So they're connected. So that means that this isn't this equal parts going in and out. Your body just adapts, slows you down, and that's why even people just stop losing weight when they're on a very strict calorie diet after a while, because the metabolism reduces. And the final thing is that all foods are actually very different. We've been misled, and how you eat the food has a very different result. Most labels are wrong about foods. Some can be up to 20% wrong. And whether you have your chickpeas eaten whole or as hummus makes a massive difference to the amount you absorb in your body. And so basically, even skilled nutritionists, dietitians can't correctly weigh out foods and do it properly. So we need to put calories in the bin. It's not the way to sort out what the best food to eat is. And you should really avoid packets that say low calorie in it. And that's generally, that's the way that the whole Zoe ethos is to, we don't talk about calories. We just talk about the quality of food and what's right for you. And all that is as much about how you eat as what you eat as well.
Definitely.
To add to that as well is the negative impact of weight cycling. So for people who are jumping on and off, jumping onto the next diet and saying, oh, I'm just going to try this, it's going to be the next thing, the silver bullets that's going to save me. And part of that, there's another conversation around that, around why do we put so much pressure on women to want to lose weight, particularly for those who aren't in the higher weight categories. But the impact of for weight cycling in terms of going onto a diet, coming off, which generally tends to happen because you're so deprived of food and you end up kind of falling off the bandwagon, because biologically we have this override to save us from that caveman era of saying, okay, I need to feed myself. So that cycling can lead to your metabolism lowering, and then you're more likely to put on more weight. So actually that the cycling is actually leading you to gain more weight throughout. So that's something where we really want to just normalize that relationship with food, kind of step back and really think about what is going to work long term in terms of your health. Is it really looking towards those health behaviors rather than weight, in terms of your diet quality, movement, reducing stress, getting enough sleep is really important and usually forgotten about in the conversation. Reducing alcohol and stopping smoking, and they're really core values.
For sure. And I think if you visit the blog at joinzoe.com, we've done a pilot program with a few users who've gone through the Zoe program, where you test your body to understand your biology, and then using those insights, you can then eat a whole range of foods that are perfect for you, and we're not counting those calories. And there's a story with a woman named Susan who was eating all of these low calorie, low fat snacks, and found that actually these foods, in her own words, were betraying her, and it's they weren't actually productive in terms of her body figuring out how it can shed weight on its own. So it's really exciting that we now have access to a more holistic way of looking at how people metabolize food by looking at their blood fat and blood sugar, as well as their gut health. So I think, unless we have any further questions, I think that wraps up our chat for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you, Tim and Emily, for your time. I'd encourage you to join the waitlist if you haven't at joinzoe.com so that you can test your own biology. And in the meantime, follow us on Instagram for updates from our team of scientists. So in addition to Tim, we've got world-leading experts in the microbiome, in fats, in sugars, and understanding how our bodies actually work. So follow us on Instagram for tips, all the science behind what we eat, and the latest research. So it's always factual, it's always evidence-based. So if you've got any questions, please let us know, and we'll see you at the next webinar. So we will be speaking to Professor Christopher Gardner from Stanford next week about carbohydrates and a lot of the research that he's done around carbs. So we'll be posting that sign up link at joinzoe.com on the blog. And we hope to see you next week. Thanks, everyone.